Hello everybody! Today I'm going to show you how I turned this thrifted men's shirt into this cute boho style dress. That's today on Refashioning with Rachel. First, I put in a pin to mark my bust line plus 1 centimeter for seam allowance. I removed the pocket from the front of the shirt. I used a pair of tweezers to pick off all those loose threads. Then I drew in a line at the level of the pin I put in earlier and cut off the bottom part of the shirt and set it aside for later. I cut off the bottom part of the sleeves just above the button placket and removed the collar from the collar band. Then I carefully folded the shirt in half, and using a loosely fitting shirt as my pattern, I folded it in half the same way. I placed it on top of the shirt, lining up the shoulder seams and the folds. I traced around the side seams of the shirt, adding 1 centimeter for seam allowance. But I wanted to keep the fullness in the sleeves, so I just drew a line from the armpit down to the bottom of the sleeves. I cut along those lines, and with right sides together, I pinned the side seams and the underarm seams. Then I sewed the underarm seam and the side seam all in one go. I also re-sewed the neckband as it became detached when I removed the collar. And I ironed everything flat, especially in the area where I removed that pocket. I removed a couple unnecessary buttons by the collar. Going back to the bottom part of the shirt that I cut off earlier, I removed the button placket from both sides. And with right sides facing, I pinned and sewed the back seam of what would become the skirt. I am using a serger to finish off my raw edges. You can, of course, zigzag the edges, or just leave them raw, nobody will know. I ironed this seam flat. This seam will now go in the back of the dress. I lined up the side seams of the skirt and made a little notch to indicate the front of the skirt. And then I made a basting stitch, which is just a long straight stitch all around the top of the skirt. I made a notch in the center back of the bodice, which will be necessary for later. And pulling on one of the basting stitch threads, I gathered up the top of the skirt until it was about as wide or a little bit less wide than the bottom of the bodice. I put the bodice inside the skirt with right sides facing and lining up all the raw edges. And I pinned the front of the bodice to the little notch that I made on the skirt, and I pinned the side seams to the side seams. And I pinned the notch that I made on the back of the bodice to the back seam of the skirt. Then I sewed everything together. Working with 1/4 section at a time, I evenly distributed the gathers and stitched the skirt to the bodice. Then I unpicked the basting stitch. To finish off the sleeves, I cut a piece of elastic long enough to fit around my forearm, plus 1 centimeter for seam allowance, and used it as a pattern to cut out another one. I sewed the elastic band into a loop, just by stitching backwards and forwards a few times over the seam allowance. Then I divided the band into 4 equal sections, and divided the end of the sleeve into 4 equal sections as well. I pinned the elastic band to the right side of the shirt sleeve, lining up the seams, and then lining up each of those quarter sections that I marked off earlier. To sew the elastic to the sleeve, I needed to pull and stretch the elastic as I sewed. This was a little bit tricky because I had to gently pull at the back of the sleeve to get it to go through the sewing machine. In retrospect, it might have been better to do a gathering stitch at the end of these sleeves, but in the end it worked out fine. After the band was attached, I hemmed the bottom of the sleeve by folding it over twice and stretching as I sewed using a zigzag stitch. I wanted to cinch in the back of the dress a little bit, so I cut out a piece of elastic a couple inches shorter than the waist, and I pinned it to the back of the shirt, lining up the centers and the side seams, and sewed it down using a zigzag stitch and stretching the elastic as I sewed. And then this project was finished. So here's a reminder of how it looked before, and this is how it looks now. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you did, and have a beautiful day.